You are listening to the podcast of the Mathias Corvinus Collegium, the largest talent management institute in Hungary. If you want to know more about our mission, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or check out our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter channels. For interesting articles and analysis of our professors, external contributors, and students, look up our knowledge base at corvinac.hu/en.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the special edition of the MCC podcast series on EU sanctions packages against Russia. We have the pleasure to greet Mr. Rodrigo Ballester, head of the Center for European Studies at Mathias Corvinus Collegium, as our special guest.
Good morning, jó napot.
My name is Bálint Eltóth. I serve as a researcher at the MCC Center for Political Science. Rodrigo, thank you for accepting our invitation.
My pleasure.
Last time we discussed the legal aspects and possible political consequences of Ukraine's fast-track EU membership request. We agreed that it was possible to speed up some of the integration steps so that Ukraine could become a candidate country quicker than usual. We also emphasized, however, that such action would be a mere political diplomatic tool from the EU side. Now let's turn to another political diplomatic instrument from Brussels' toolkit. On the 3rd of June, EU member states adopted the sixth package of restrictive measures against Russia. The European Commission claims that sanctions are among the EU's most visible, direct and powerful responses to Russia's brutal and unprovoked attack on Ukraine, including systemic violence and atrocities against the civilian population. In light of Belarus's role in the aggression, this package also includes additional penalties towards the Minsk regime. The new sanctions, when combined with the other five packages, are unprecedented and intended to raise economic pressure on Russia, while also limiting its ability to prosecute its war in Ukraine. The sixth sanctions package includes a phased-in embargo on Russian crude and refined oil. However, Hungary won a broad exemption from such sanctions. Around 2/3 of fuel imports from Russia arrive on ships. However, the European harbors will soon be closed for such shipments. As a result, the EU ban will cover around 90% of the bloc's oil purchases from Russia by the end of 2022. By exempting pipelined oil, landlocked EU member states can still buy Russian refined and crude fuels for an undetermined period of time. However, EU leaders intend to return to the issue of the exemption's duration in the near future. Rodrigo, do you believe that with the sixth package, the EU has managed to preserve its unity in the face of Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
I think yes. It was a difficult birth. Of course, there's a lot of mediatic noise, but when you take a cool head and you take a bit of distance, it's still reassuring to see that sanctions of that magnitude were finally adopted rather quickly, because 1 month is actually quick in the EU world, while preserving this unity. I think we are getting impatient. First, medias are impatient by nature. And second, the pace of adoption of the five previous packages was so quick, so unexpectedly quick. And at the end, we expect big leaders to take extremely difficult decisions in a matter of hours. And this is not the way it happens. And also, don't forget that this sixth package came with the original sin is that, it was a package that was not discussed. It has been announced too quickly in a premature way. The problem is that von der Leyen, who wanted to please the parliament and so announced it beginning of May, without having properly discussed it with all the member states and without having anticipated all the technical questions and all the technical anticipation. That's why also it was negotiated for such a long time. But again, to adopt this major measure with small compromises, because at the end of the day, it's 90% of the crude oil which is going to be banned from the EU in relatively soon, and in a matter of less than a month. For newspapers, for journalists, it's a failure. I think for the rest of the audience, it's definitely a sign that this unity has been preserved.
Talking about the media, many people think that Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's tactics have worked, as he did not want to endanger Hungary's vital energy supplies, so he refused to agree to the sanctions right until other EU leaders gave up. On the other hand, Hungary's step made many of its former allies frustrated, especially from the Central East European region. Nevertheless, some other countries were allegedly very happy to support secretly Orbán's quite straightforward positioning. In the end, Hungary's prime minister got what he wanted. But do you think there will be a price for it? I'm talking about the potential loss of former close friends.
There will certainly be a political price. But before I dig a bit more into that, let me just stress that when it comes to negotiations, actually, Orban is a pretty easy client in the sense that he's absolutely straightforward. He says what he does and he does what he says. And so for already months, he was saying, look, we have red lines. And then he's also a man that is also pretty engaging when you negotiate with him. That's the first thing. The second one is that indeed, when you have such a compromise in the European Union, it also means that you put relevant and pertinent questions on the table. It's not a little capriccio, a little temper, it's not just a political will to block anyone. It's just that your arguments were strong. Otherwise, I don't think that Mrs. von der Leyen would have come to Budapest to negotiate. I don't think that the others would have found a compromise. And indeed, third point that you already stressed in your question is that in the EU, some speak up and some don't, but they think exactly the same thing. And most probably, the Hungarian position was somehow satisfactory also for other member states. By the way, if you look carefully at this sixth package, you will see that, and this is official wording from the European Commission, that Bulgaria, Croatia, and the Czech Republic also benefited from some exceptions. So first, already evidence that Hungary was not alone. It was not 1 against 26. And second, it's also likely that Hungary's position also raised maybe not sympathy, but at least understanding in other Western European countries. And I think we are going to see those who are silent today, they might be less silent later on if the crucial question of gas supply is put on the table of the sanctions. So will now Hungary or Orban pay a political price for that? Well, he's already paying a political price for whatever he does, basically. Don't underestimate the fact that between some parts of Brussels and some leaders, for example, the Benelux leader and Orban, it became a personal issue. Whatever Orban does is going to be criticized. It became really to a level of hysteria and irrationality that really doesn't serve the political discussions at all. The problem is that indeed the limits of the support of the Visegrad country. And within the Visegrad countries, you have countries that have totally antagonist positions on the current aggression of Russia on Ukraine. You have on the one hand Poland, which is probably the most active, the most belligerent against Russia. Also the Baltics, but they are not part of the Visegrad. And on the other extreme, you have Hungary, which is now in a position of, let's say, a kind of neutrality, always within the boundaries of the EU and NATO. And so the Visegrad group has always been very flexible, very malleable. It has been always a very interesting machine that, despite disagreements, always kept moving. It's true that here, I think the biggest threat to the Visegrad countries are the public opinions and the published opinions of a lot, in several of these countries, especially in Poland versus Hungary. Will the group survive that? History will tell. It depends very much on the outcomes of the war and also on some other common causes they might have, for example, like the conditionality of EU funds.
Talking about relevant questions on the table and antagonist issues temporarily dividing the V for public opinion, individual penalties over invasion of Ukraine won't target Putin's ally, Russian Orthodox Patriarch Kirill, due to the opposition from Hungary. Kirill is often portrayed as a leading advocate of the invasion of Ukraine and as a close ally of Russian President Putin. However, Hungary opposed Kirill's inclusion on the sanctions list. Thus, diplomats could choose between holding up the entire sanctions package or agreeing to the Hungarian Prime Minister's demands, as all EU sanctions need the backing of the bloc's 27 member states. In the name of the freedom of religion, the Hungarian government argued that sanctions should not target religious leaders. Was Kirill's exemption a huge win for the Hungarian government or a lost battle for EU bureaucrats lobbying for stricter sanctions? In other words, how do you see, is it the win of pragmatism over idealism?
Good question. So I think no one really knows all the details behind this battle, whether Kirill should be included in the list, the Patriarch Kirill should be introduced in the covered by the sanctions or not. Some might say that once Hungary obtained the exemptions on energy, on crude oil, he could have done a gesture, because some say that Hungary was again hijacking the negotiations. On the other hand, some say as well that Hungary kept his head cool and his common sense, and also warn against, like the totally counterproductive effect of sanctioning a religious leader. And maybe Hungary has more sensitivity to religious matters than the rest of the European Union. And indeed, it's fair to ask whether the rather symbolic inclusion of this person in the list of sanctions wouldn't have been more detrimental than anything else. I don't know much about the profile of Kirill. Some say that he was even a leader of the KGB or important KGB member in the latest times of the Soviet Union. Honestly, I don't know. What is true is that he has been very supportive of Putin's aggression, and this is not something to be praised. He's a controversial religious leader, and he phrased his support to Putin in very unambiguous and very shocking terms that I don't share at all. This being said, does he travel to start with? Does it make sense, for example, to restrict his mobility when actually he probably doesn't travel? Does he have assets? Things like that. Can you compare it to one of the oligarchs that have direct economic interests in Russia's economy? I don't think so. Was it more of a symbolic gesture from the EU leaders that would have been counterproductive? I don't know, but I think it's a fair question. It's also true that we also have to put also in perspective the alleged veto of Hungary. Hungary defended its basic survival interest in the issue of crude, and yes, also put a veto on the patriarch. Apart from that, this sixth package covers as well financial measures. It also covers broadcasting measures, also on chemicals, on other energy aspects. It's a very broad package. And so here, again, we are looking only at the tree. So the big tree of oil, I admit, that's really a big chunk, but also the tiny little detail of this patriarch. At the end of the day, this very far-reaching package has been adopted on many other things. And I think this is the story that should prevail.
So it would have been a rather symbolic gesture to include Patriarch Kirill.
According to me, yes.
Sanctions.
And maybe, who knows, but maybe a counterproductive one, because it would have been perceived as a direct attack on Russian church, so to say. And does that make any good for the conflict? I think that was a fair question that diplomats had on the table.
I see. However, one thing is sure, the sanction dispute has almost exposed the limits of the EU's ability to show unity and speak up with one voice in global politics, both in terms of energy concerns and cultural policies. Hungary's foreign minister deemed the process of negotiations regarding the introduction of newer sanctions a long battle, adding that the package is now in line with the country's national security interests. However, since the Amsterdam Treaty that has entered into force in 1999, we have common foreign and security policies within the European Union, coordinated by a high representative who represents the EU on the international chessboard. So one could draw the conclusion that the EU's security interests are in line with its member states' interests. Why is it so then that the countries with different geopolitical concerns and attributes have to fight to reach their foreign policy goals, even within the community?
Because the story of the European Union is a story of internal discussions until you reach a compromise, which is normal if you are speaking here about 27 member states. How can 27 states that are so different have the same interest automatically, spontaneously? This is simply impossible. I just give you a couple of examples. But do you think that the interests of Hungary in South America are the same as the interests of Spain in South America? Obviously not. Do you think that the interests of Hungary in the Western Balkans are the same as the interest of Sweden in the Western Balkans? Obviously not. We are different enough to at least allow ourselves to speak before taking a decision and adopting a compromise. So again, I don't want to play the geopolitical drama queen in the sense that every time the EU takes more than 5 minutes to agree on a package of sanctions or anything else, it's a failure. Or any time the EU fails to adopt, a solution to migration, it's a failure. 27 member states decided by unanimity. It's a miracle that those things can happen within weeks. I asked the audience, if there were 27 people around the room, would they agree in 10 minutes, in choosing a restaurant for tonight or choosing a movie or a series they're going to watch this evening? They would not succeed in 10 minutes. They will probably not succeed by unanimity even in 2 hours. So let's put things into perspective. I think this is very, very important. And Second, again, we shouldn't focus only on the parts where you don't have consensus. Do people know, for example, that the EU agreed again to activate the European Peace Facility to send more weapons to Ukraine, for example? No, those things were also included in the discussions that are now part of the sanction packages. And so those things tend rather to work. The underlying question in your comment, Balint, is unanimity. Is it still fair to use unanimity in the field of common foreign policy and in the EU in general? You have a lot of federalists, especially those who organize like the pantomime of the conference on the future of Europe, that now claim that, of course, European citizens want the end of unanimity. I totally disagree with them. I am a big supporter of unanimity. The minute the Poles, for example, wouldn't have the possibility to block a decision on Russia, or the minute France could not block a decision on the Sahel, for example, or Spain on Morocco, this will be the beginning of the end of the European foreign policy. So for me, the unanimity is the guarantee of survival. Without that, it will, within 2 years, everything will explode and we will have no common foreign policy anymore.
So you're saying that the EU is not about to reach its limits of acting as a strong alliance, and there is actually nothing new under the sun. That's just the way it has always been with the EU.
Yes.
That's how it has always functioned.
We spoke about it last time with enlargement. Who was blocking enlargement? France was blocking enlargement because for them it was main crucial political interest. And again, they were speaking for those who didn't dare to speak up, who were just standing behind France. So exactly the same configuration. But again, if countries have a red line, and I forgot Greece, do you think Greece doesn't have a red line with Turkey, for example? Every country has its own red lines. If we stop respecting them, that will be the end of the consensus for everything else.
As for the sanctions vis-à-vis Russia, how do you see the dialogue and the debates between the heads of states and governments of the member states of the European Union? Are these current negotiations different from the ones related to for instance, the 2020 COVID crisis management or the 2008 sovereign debt crisis management?
The current discussions look to me much more constructive, to be honest. Again, with a bit of distance, who would have bet on the 15th of February that the EU, in the case of a war, could have adopted 5 packages of sanction in basically 2 months? No one would have signed that. No one. And it happened, and especially the first 2 weeks after the Russians' aggression, really saw like a unity that was totally unexpected in the European Union, and also a speed, the pace. Some decisions can take years to be adopted in the European Union, and here they were taken within days. So the first balance was excellent. And now it's also normal that the more important the sanctions are, the more sacrifices that also member states have to do, because those sanctions will have an impact on the European Union. Of course, there's a price to pay for that. It's also normal that the more you climb up the ladder, the more time it will take to agree. And I don't expect, for example, a 7th package of sanctions to be adopted swiftly. You will have a lot of discussions. Again, the mistake was to first announce the sanction and then negotiate them with the member states. The 7th package should totally turn this dynamic. It should be done the other way around. On the negotiations in the Council now, apart from the fact that I find them more constructive, you still have member states, especially in the West, that take some problems with the East personally. The best example is Mark Rutte, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, who never misses an occasion, to patronize Hungary, Orban. Now he stopped with Poland, but that he also used to do the same thing. So they really behave in a totally undiplomatic and unpolitical manner. It's a child game, I have the impression. It's a virtue signaling reflex. It's very trendy now. Everyone wants to appear like the good guys in front of everyone. This is pure wokeism. But yeah, this is exactly also what, for example, the Benelux are doing, and especially Mark Rutte. Does it help? And especially when you also have a lot of double standards. Because again, here, it's easy to bash Hungary because they are outspoken. They are very outspoken, actually. Orban is very straightforward. You may like it or not. But the other countries share the same points of view. Look, even with Germany. Germany somehow, is also in this position of prudence. I don't know who will be right or wrong on the scale of history, but those things at least are fair questions. And it's also important to preserve Europe's unity, that things don't get personal the way they became now. And I was a bit optimistic at the beginning. I thought really that this war will bring a landslide of pragmatism over the European Union. And actually, it is not the case at all. Look, conditionality is still on the table. And now the latest episodes, I think, of this sectarism came from the European Parliament, again, came from the Renew group, again. I mean, the Renew group is really the best examples that there is an extreme center. Here it is. But actually, I mean, this party now proposed a motion of censure against the current commission, against von der Leyen, because she released finally the EU and recovery funds to Poland. So basically, we're in the middle of the war. We have the tanks of Putin a couple of 100 kilometers away from Poland. Poland is suffering a lot, is helping a lot. Finally, the EU gives them the funds that they deserved anyway, and you still have some members of the European Parliament proposing a motion against von der Leyen. This is absolute madness and virtue signaling. So I think, again, the first thing that should change in the European Union is definitely the European Parliament. With this one, we're not going to go anywhere.
There is no fire without a flame. The EU has always functioned this way through severe negotiations between representatives of its member states and bureaucrats. It's just that the whole process is receiving a bigger media attention now, and this affects policy making, so it can hijack the original process. Just for the record, sanctions on Russian gas are off the table for now. However, measures against Russian banks, as we already mentioned,
and Russian media as well.
And media, yes, are part of this new package. And there are many military officials and other high-profile public figures, oligarchs and athletes and celebrities on the sanctions list. Mr. Rodrigo Ballester, thank you very much for sharing your most appreciated views and thoughts with us. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It was my pleasure. Thanks again.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to the special edition of the MCC podcast series about EU sanctions packages against Russia. Thank you for your kind attention. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to this MCC podcast episode. For further media content, please look up our English website at mcc.hu/en or look for us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you want to read more by our professors, external contributors, and students, check out our knowledge base at corvinec.hu/en.